Welcome, colleagues, to this screencast for our December member benefit theme of engaging learners, anytime, any place, anyhow. The aim of this is to provide programme leaders or colleagues in equivalent positions with an informal 15-minute resource that you can watch over a cup of coffee and which shares ideas, practical examples and core principles that may assist you with fostering student engagement online. My name is Katrina Bell and I'm a Senior Advisor in Learning and Teaching at Advance HE, and I'm also a Head of Membership for our Scottish member institutions. In a moment, I have the pleasure of introducing you to my colleague, Angela Vickerstaff from Nottingham Trent University in the UK. Ange is a Principal Lecturer at Nottingham Business School and has a wealth of experience in supporting learning and teaching across the higher education sector. She is also an Advance HE consultant who I've had the great pleasure of working with on our Scottish Academic Leadership Programme over the past 2 years, alongside our other colleague, Pauline Hainsworth from Scotland's Rural College. This Academic Leadership Programme has focused on supporting and developing leadership skills for programme leaders across Scottish institutions, and it was originally based around a monthly face-to-face format. However, like many colleagues in the sector, the three of us had an interesting experience pivoting our programme online in March this year in response to COVID-19. And we learned a huge amount from this, both from the experience of pivoting online and also from our fabulous cohort of programme leaders participants on the course. So I'm delighted that Ange has agreed to draw from this and also her own experience in teaching students herself at Nottingham Trent University this semester. And she's going to share with you some practical examples and principles that include ideas for co-creating engagement techniques with your own students. And we hope that you find them useful. So Ange, if I could come to you now and just start by asking a couple of questions to draw from your experiences, please. So if we start with any key reflections that you have from our own pivot online for the Scottish Academic Leadership Programme, please.
So we were partway through the Scottish Academic Leadership Programme. It was designed as a face-to-face delivery on pretty much a monthly basis. And we were kind of halfway through that when COVID brought everything to an abrupt halt. So we had experiences during that really condensed period of time in how we pivoted that and moved online. So our learning from that, I think first and foremost is keep it simple and consistent. Because when we first started to think about how to go online, it was a bit like kiddies in a toy shop, and we had loads of different technologies and things we could do, and it's easy to get really excited and lost in all of that. But one of the first things that we learned is that putting up loads of materials and using lots of different technologies can mean that the key learning and the key messages gets lost. And it's also very challenging for our students or our participants, and to be honest, for us delivering as well. You will lose a group if you obviously end up spending longer trying to find materials or getting the technology to work properly. So definitely keeping it simple and consistent. And to do that, it was very much about talking across the team. So the three of us, Pauline, Katrina and myself, really worked closely together as a team so that we had quite a cohesive delivery for our participants. So we're using standard layouts, similar approaches, so that it didn't feel very different from one module experience to the next. We definitely needed to use a limited number of bits of software, or as one of our colleagues termed it recently, a limited digital ecosystem. So we started off with a few basics and then built upon these, because if you don't, you're going to lose your students or your participants along the way. You spend too long thinking about that technology, overcoming all of those technical problems, and then you lose the essence of the learning. So it's definitely a model that I use now around using these home technologies, which we're all getting more familiar with, and then gradually introducing guest technologies for a particular purpose. Something I think we learned quite early on in the process was that we needed to work it through from a student perspective and actually experience it. And that's one thing that our participants really valued in the programme, was that they were the learners, we were the ones in charge notionally, and it was invaluable to see what it felt like being in that online learning environment. On a really cool, really practical level, it's also thinking about your students. How are they going to access materials? How are they going to make notes? Really basic things like, how are we going to give them the handouts that they need at this particular point in time? So it can often be the same activities that you would use in a face-to-face format, but it's how you deliver them that might have to be different. So I would say don't throw everything out and develop everything from new, but think about how you reuse, refresh things to make them work in an online environment. And often, back to that earlier point, often the really simple solutions work well. I can remember wasting hours thinking about how on earth was I going to do something, and could I use something in Google Drive, or how could I sort and share documents. And in the end, we actually saved a lot of stuff as a standard Word document. So we created workbooks for participants that they could then use to take notes on activities to capture their learning. And actually that was something that it came back and they said that they really enjoyed. So work it through from a student perspective, follow their journey through. Practice technology is a definite key learning outcome. Our first attempts with using technology were absolutely woeful. Practice at scale if possible, because things that work when there's just maybe 2 or 3 of you playing with it might not work when you have big numbers involved. And what really worked for us with opportunities for engagement. So in the Scottish Academic Leadership Programme, the participants really valued the opportunity to work in groups, to share their experience, just to engage, to chat together, to be actively involved in things. Now that can take longer to set up, to get the materials to hand, to get the groups to work together. But as they become more comfortable with doing that, it really works. And that was something that came through that was really valued by the participants. And a final observation, you've got to keep a sense of humour, because I swear that was the only thing that got us through that difficult time. So keep a sense of humour, be inclusive and ask for help, because often students and participants can help us resolve some of these problems as we go along on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much, Ange. And yes, I'm having fond memories of our first synchronous online session as well, and the interesting background noises that we had through, and trying to launch the virtual classroom and sort out breakout rooms. It was a voyage of a discovery, definitely. So thank you for those initial reflections about our own Pivot Online. I wondered if you'd picked up any new ideas for encouraging participant or student engagement from that course.
I think at that time, so we're talking about the summer period here, so we'd had that initial very quick move to online, and lots of our participants were showing similar concerns, and we hadn't got answers together at that point in time. It was really great at sharing practice and also in thrashing out what the key challenges for people were, particularly for programme leaders. And I think a lot of it came down to how to create this sense of community when you're in an online learning environment, how to encourage interactions between the students, especially if the students are maybe drawn from a really big cohort. They might not have met one another face to face. They might not even know one another in the case of first year students. One colleague summed it up really nicely in a Padlet, funnily enough, and said, how do we create the corridor and the classroom environment that we have in face-to-face learning? So you know when you're delivering a session and you're waiting to go into the teaching room and the students are milling around together outside and they're all chatting away to one another, they ask you a few questions, you chat along with them, and at that point you get a sense of how the students are doing. You get a sense of where they're at, what the mood of the day is, but also importantly, they engage with one another socially, they build up connections. When they finish, they often leave the room together, they go and get a coffee, they go and work together in the library. So they develop their own support networks as well, and they get more comfortable, they get to know you, and they get to connect and work with you as well. So it was really the biggest challenge that we identified was, how do you engage your students and how do you create that sense of community in an online learning environment?
Thank you, Ange. Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges I think that we've all been facing. And lastly, just to finish up this short screencast, do you have any top tips for encouraging student engagement that colleagues might find useful?
I have some, and I would say for me, I've kept it really simple and easy. I would have been one of the last people to charge into doing online delivery given a choice in years gone by. But I have to say, I've really quite got into it and I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed delivering the sessions, and some of my best wins have been from really simple and easy things. So I've had to think about some of those things that I'd like to share in this screencast. So to start off with, I really focused on how do I engage students and build in some socially oriented activities, just using a limited range of technologies, and do something that's quite fun, so that students' first experience of a particular piece of software, for example, wasn't, oh my goodness, have I followed the link? Will I ever get back into the learning room? Something that they can do that's really low risk, that can get them engaging with one another. So basic practice, start off with an icebreaker. You do it in face-to-face, why don't you do it in a learning room as well? So I really focused on that in early days. So I use that every session still now. I use it to get some chat going in the Teams meeting room. Get students then talking about the icebreaker, either in the chat function or talking on or off camera. It gives the sessions a nice relaxed start. Doesn't matter if you're a couple of minutes late arriving. Gives me a chance to get all of my right PowerPoint slides up and running, for example. But it's getting them engaged, breaking the ice. I started off with one that a colleague came up with, which is about what is your favourite biscuit? I have to say that proved one of the more controversial. I still do not understand why some students don't seem to understand the value of a dark chocolate digestive biscuit, but it got everybody talking. What I then did is I moved on to icebreakers that got students to be introduced to new features of Teams. So in the second week that I was delivering with a group, I got them to upload an image. And I think I said something really simple about an image that makes you happy. So for me, that was a daft picture of my little dog when she'd stolen a very large cookie. So there's a little black dog, massive cookie in her mouth. Made us all laugh and smile, but it encouraged students to share. So we had lots of really good pet photos, but also happy places. So pictures of beaches, desert islands, the shot out of an aeroplane, sporting events, even a signed football shirt. And that was fantastic because the students started to talk informally to connect with one another where they've got common interests or hobbies. It was something personal and fun. And it meant that they could all upload a file, which they needed to be able to do for the activity the following week. So thinking ahead, it gave us practice with the technology. And then after a couple of weeks of doing that, I moved on to getting my students to co-host sessions with me. And this was a fantastic idea, which came directly to one of the participants on the academic leadership programme. So starting off, I picked one student who seemed relatively confident, had a chat with them, they were happy to do it. And I got them to choose the icebreaker for the next week. So they let the rest of the group know in advance so that they could think about it. And it worked really well. It shared the workload, so I wasn't having to think up of an icebreaker every single week. And they came up with some great ideas. I now have a list that I keep on hand of all of my favourite ones. Favourite music went down really well. That week I got asked to turn down my music because I was apparently playing Green Day far too loud. The fact that they could ask me to do that and take the mick out of me suggested to me that we'd got a decent relationship, a good rapport by then. We've also had favourite films, best travel experience, some odd ones as well. If you were a piece of cutlery, what would it be and why? That had me
Right.
stumped. If you were a breed of dog, which one would you be and why? That was quite specialist, having it, but again, it made us all laugh. Even if you knew nothing about dogs, you could engage in that because they were kind of saying, why? Would you want to do this? Why is that dog like that? So lots of opportunities there. There's also other ones I've come across recently, like Room 101. If you were going to ban something, what would it be? Best or worst day ever. We did that recently. So loads of different icebreakers, but the student picking them, sharing them definitely helps rather than me instigating that. That student also gets their confidence up, so they're acting as a co-host for me for the remainder of the session. So they're fabulous. I get them to flag up to me if I've missed someone putting their hand up, or if there's a message in the chat that I've not seen come in because I'm working two different screens. If screen sharing isn't working, they're always the ones that let me know. They're involved. And also, they're often really fantastic at helping to address any problems that arise. So they'll give other students advice on technology, or they'll keep their eye on timings for me. And basically, I think because they're partly involved, it encourages the students to participate further as well. And then at the end of the session, I get my co-host to pick the next person who's going to co-host and develop the icebreaker. And they all really love that because it's like, oh, who are you going to ask this time? I'm going to pick on him because he was really good or he was really rubbish or whatever. So it just creates a bit of rapport between the students as well. So I really quite enjoy that part of the session.
That's fantastic. Really creative.
And then just to finish off with, I think at the end of the session, always try and finish on a positive note. And it's really hard to make enough time for the student engagement stuff. So you put it in at the beginning, but I always make sure that at the end of the session, we have 10 or 15 minutes for me to have a sense check of where they're at, and we try and capture that. So either in the chat function, where they might say respond on a rating scale, they might pick an emoji or a GIF that represents how they're feeling at that point. And also building next steps. What are you going to do next? Make that a 1-minute write, anything along those lines for them to just capture that they've made progress from where they were to where they are now. And then I leave time for questions. I try to avoid just dashing off and building time for them to ask questions. And then the feedback I get from my students has been really positive. So although this in particular, I've been using this on a final year module with a lot of independent study, but the students have said that they really look forward to the sessions because they find them fun and that they interact with one another. And the fact that they're able to interact with one another and they're comfortable, for me, enables me to achieve far higher levels of student engagement because they talk, they contribute, they work together, and they're comfortable asking questions and helping one another, so to support their own learning. So really, it's the same kind of stuff that we do face to face, but just being confident in creating the space to do it. So even if you have to move content out and move content into independent study, I would invest the time in getting the student engagement up during the session. I think it's really valuable for the students to have time to engage in their learning.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ange. That's some simple but really effective top tips there. And how long would you typically spend? How much time would you give to those kind of activities within a typical teaching session?
So if you were doing a 2-hour session, then I might allow maybe 10 minutes at the start of the session and then maybe 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session. So it is a significant amount of time.
Mm-hmm. But it makes a difference in terms of engagement.
Yeah, and it makes the other stuff flow much more quickly, and also allowing more time when you're getting students to work on other things as well. So if you're getting them into breakout rooms, building in time that it might take a few minutes for them to all kind of say hello to one another, remember who's who, maybe decide to switch on their cameras and share a bit more. And I give them the space to do that. So I allow them a bit extra time, and I keep out of breakout rooms until they're comfortable. So I maybe wait 5 minutes before I go on and say, oh, are you all okay? Do you know what to do? And you on task? Give them a chance to kind of get talking together first of all.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you so much. Really practical, helpful, handy
Simple.
tips. And speaking as a vet, I like your dog breed ice cream. I'm going to try that.
You dates that one, wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely. Got my top breed lined up in here. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and practical tips with us, Ange. And we hope that these have been useful to any colleagues who are watching them. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.